He's also taken lyrics from the 1960s classic Mod song and flipped it into a Casio reggae song. And what she does with her voice in this song, I find very interesting. She adds almost schoolgirl. Today we will be exploring unusual voices in mainstream and club music.
Get my song boy. Get my song boy. Get my song boy. Yeah, get my song boy.
When punk started, there were no punk records. So imagine going to a club to see a genre of music that you really love, and in between the bands, there's a DJ. Well, what is the DJ playing? Because no one's recorded any punk records yet, but people still like to dance and they want to hang out and they want to stay at the party. So the DJ is playing everything from 60s rock and reggae and ska and rock steady and disco. So when I came to New York in the 80s, you would go to a club and hear all those things together in the same mix, regardless of what the band was. Like I could go to the Cat Club and it would be a goth night, but the DJ might also throw in Kraftwerk and Afrika Bambaataa. So having that be my introduction to club culture is what motivated me to put this together.
Yeah, get my song boy.
So speaking of punk, punky reggae, and Ari Up of the Slits, she is a fascinating, unusual voice to me for a number of reasons. She was of German and Italian descent and grew up in London, and Motown was a big influence on her singing style as well as a lot of songs that she covered. One of the Slits' biggest hit songs was a cover of Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, I Heard It Through the Grapevine. They changed the lyrics to I Heard It Through the Bass Line and added a punky reggae twist to it. She also was a big student of John Holt as well as Dennis Bovell. And if you look at some of the work that she did with On You Sound, you can hear those influences as well. I was very drawn to her music and the Slits and the bands that were in that scene at the same time. One of her dear friends was a New York artist who also kind of lived back and forth between the States and London, Judy Nylon. And Judy Nylon also dabbled in reggae and dub, collaborating with some of the same artists, such as the pop group, On You Sound, etc. She also has her own unique voice. One of her biggest hit songs being Love in a Lift. And then she also had a group with another woman in New York named Patti Paladin called Snatch. A lot of people know Judy for her work with Brian Eno, but what she was doing with reggae and also with post-punk, again, was extremely unusual for the era we're talking about. So her voice is on the list of people that I look to.
Yeah, get my song boy.
So at this point, I'd mentioned a few artists that kind of got their roots in punk and some early club music, spanning from about 1977 to 1982. In New York, the women doing this music and really just giving an unusual take to the sounds were very unapologetic and fearless. And we're talking about the 70s and early 80s, so a lot of the terminology we use now wasn't so common then, describing like gender politics and whatnot. And, you know, Judy Nylon is my kind of adopted punk mentor, so she tells me stories of things that happened then, but again, the terminology is very different, so I don't want to change history with that. But another interesting thing that happened during that time, because punk had a bad reputation, it wasn't considered cool, so the American marketing term for punk became new wave. And the thing about new wave that made it marketable and quote unquote safe is it's often described that new wave was punk with money from the suburbs. And with that attitude came a wave of bands behind it. During the new wave time, there was still a bit of a crossover from the UK and also the Eastern Bloc, and one of those artists was Lenny Lovitch. I mention her for a couple of reasons, mainly because she was also doing dance music with a very unusual vocal attack, something between theatrical and operatic. She was also visually very out there, compared to the slick, polished new wave presentation here. When you think of a band like Blondie or Scandal or those artists, she was more in alignment with her colleague Nina Hagen. So they were giving you heavy makeup, something a little gothic, extreme punk, a little bit not so flattering and deconstructed. And her hit song Lucky Number was a dance hit and a new wave hit and a college radio hit at the same time. Shortly after that, she went on to collaborate with Nina Hagen for one of the first songs I personally remember being specifically about animal rights, and it was called Don't Eat the Animals. It was also a big dance hit, and yeah, she's a very interesting person because she had I think a theater background also, and she didn't try to commercialize herself or polish herself in any way. She seemed very much about her conviction and very authentic, as did Nina Hagen.
Yeah, get my song wet.
Speaking of Nina Hagen, a friend of mine had actually come to New York for a summer and brought back some of her music. And that's when I heard Nina's song, New York, New York. Nina aspired to a lot of the same elements vocally as Lenny Lovich, but I would say even more extreme in this track in particular, which was a dance hit from pretty big dance clubs in New York, straight to the underground scene, to like the Mud Club or an area. She features some German kind of guttural rapping, which again was a new area for women, especially non-women of color, to embark upon in the 80s. So she's rapping, she's singing theatrically, her lyrics are comical, but she's also telling a very gritty story, and it's danceable. And that was a really big hit song for her as well. I think that she was pretty daring to try those things all at once at the time, because it definitely was not mainstream. The only other women outside of hip hop culture that you would hear rapping then would be Blondie on Rapture. And that was also, again, extremely unusual and kind of phenomenal that it became such a mainstream song.
Yeah, get my song wet.
Another thing that was kind of happening during the time of Lenny Lovich and Nina Hagen was more world music beats were starting to filter into new wave. And this goes back to 77, 78, 79 a bit, and it goes back to London with bands like Bow Wow Wow. Bow Wow Wow is very interesting. Annabella was also young like Ari. When they both started their bands, they were like 14 and 15 years old, which now, if you can only imagine, we have younger pop stars now, but they were touring with grown men during this time. So it was a very extreme dynamic. Another thing that's interesting about Annabella is her lyrics were also very politically charged. At a time when a lot of punk and dance music was whimsical and playful and even bordering on decadent, she was also talking about animal rights and politics and not being materialistic. And maybe because she was a cute young woman, people took it with a grain of salt, but she's still performing to this day with that same message and the same conviction. So a lot of the things that she did vocally were a bit similar to Ari. She did animal sounds. She did some guttural things. She didn't sing in a different language, even though her background is Burmese. She also grew up in London. And she brought in different elements of American rock and roll to the music. The thing that drew me personally to Bow Wow Wow is the Bo Diddley big beat and rockabilly guitar. And that really kind of got me into their brand of new wave. I was coming from listening to surf records and whatnot before new wave existed. So hearing that on a new wave record with someone as punk as they were was a big influence. And it also influenced a lot of other bands to kind of follow in those footsteps.
Yeah, get my song wet.
I'm bringing it back from the UK for a moment to talk about an artist people don't necessarily associate with America, but she is based in New York City, and that's Yoko Ono. At the same exact time that Bow Wow Wow's I Want Candy and Sinner, Sinner, Sinner were huge hits on top 40 and new wave charts, Yoko released her dance hit Walking on Thin Ice. And that song has been remixed multiple times. She is in her 80s and still performing it. She's not someone people think of as a vocalist initially. She was a performance artist who also was working in psychedelic music with the Plastic Ono Band for many, many years. And she's really inspiring because she hasn't changed her approach to music or philosophy or life at all. I wanted to mention her because obviously living in New York City affected her as an artist, and she brought that to her work. And I think that she still has a way of being very aware of what's happening in the world, despite all the things that she's seen, and she brings that to the music. And her voice is unusual, and maybe people say it's not so pretty, but it's hers and she owns it.
Yeah, get my song boy.
So we're still talking about the era of roughly 1981 to 1982, coming on the heels of Yoko Ono's big dance hit. I want to mention another unusual vocalist from Buffalo, New York, who was a protege to Rick James. Her name was Tina Marie. She had a huge gospel presence in the voice of a tiny white woman, and it was very shocking because she really broke out in black radio. The first song I heard by her was Square Biz, and I believe she was even on Soul Train. And her presence, her talent, her performance energy, it was all so infectious that no one cared. And that's what you want as an artist. You just want people to be so excited about what you create that it doesn't matter that you're not giving what is expected. She's definitely one of my favorite vocalists. I feel like her vocal style wavered between heavy R&B and pure 1940s jazz. If I were to say a Sarah Vaughan or an Ella Fitzgerald, she had that kind of crystal range. And again, for the time, we're talking like disco has just ended, punk is kind of on its way out, and new wave is definitely rising, and here comes Tina Marie. So she's really a standout artist. Her career lasted well into the 90s, up until pretty much that she had passed away. But she was no joke.
Yeah, get my song boy.
During that same time, another form of music was starting to bubble up in New York City called freestyle. And in the freestyle moment, which really was on the heels of early hip hop in clubs like the Fun House and Bonds, and I'm probably forgetting all the rest, the Underground, which I also went to, there was a song, a breakout hit by an artist named Tana Gardner called Heartbeat. Heartbeat is a song I really want to talk about for a few reasons. One, it's been sampled by tons of people, from De La Soul to, I don't even know, probably the Jungle Brothers. But two, when I first heard the song, I thought it was Denise Williams. And Denise Williams was a huge R&B pop singer at the time that the song dropped. It's very bubbly, it's very fun, it's very laid back, and something about the song really resonates with you and lasts. It has a timeless energy to it. When you hear it, you feel like, okay, it's summer, because I just heard Heartbeat. And at the same time, there was another kind of new up-and-coming freestyle song by Debbie Deb called When I Hear Music. When I Hear Music, to me, it's not just me, it kind of sparked the beginning of what I call breakdance era in music. You definitely would go to a club and see a battle circle happening. You would see a circle of girls dancing, you would see a circle of guys, b-boys, b-girls, whomever, and people would just run to the dance floor to hear that song. It's also a song that you would hear coming out of a car window at the beach. So these songs are, in a way, I would say, comparable to girl group era 1950s music, because they're all teenagers. Maybe it's a one-hit wonder, but it's a one-hit wonder that never goes away, that you hear all the time. And Maybe they're not the best vocalists. Maybe they're a little flat. Maybe they're a little nasal. But you know what? Teenagers can sing along with it and feel that power. And that's an unusual element that when people try to think about what makes that song a hit, it's a hit because people can relate to it, but also they can relate to the fact that the voice isn't perfect because we're human. So to me, that's the secret weapon of freestyle, is none of these vocalists are perfect, but you love the songs and you love the stories and it gives you joy.
Yeah, get my song wet.
One of the first times I heard female vocals with more experimental electronics was in the 1982 film Liquid Sky. And the artist in that film, Slava Sukaman, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, she samples her own heartbeat at the beginning of a song, turns it into a drum beat, and the song is called Me and My Rhythm Box. This song is so groundbreaking for a host of reasons. It's super minimalist. It's to me like kind of the beginning of dark wave, because it's not quite dark like gothic, it's more like industrial. And then again, she has a very unusual voice. It's not particularly pretty. She doesn't have the biggest vocal range, but she has a lot of conviction in the way that she presents the song. And it's actually made me want to explore more of her music.
Yeah, get my song wet.
A key instrument that stands out for me is the Casio Tone keyboard that also has drum machine built in. This is something like kids in middle school and high school of my era got for Christmas or your birthday or whatever, and a lot of artists built their early beats on this machine. So I hear that tone in Me and My Rhythm Box. I can't say it's a tone that Grace Jones used, but I feel like the mood is there in some of her music as well, specifically in one of her dance hits called Unlimited Capacity for Love. I bring up this song for also a different reason, because it's very different from some of her earlier work. Grace Jones came out of the disco era. So one of her first hit songs was called Do or Die. She comes out with boxing gloves. She's wearing like a cut-off wife beater. She's looking extremely androgynous, extremely powerful. And then you hear her voice, and it's like she's in a Broadway musical. It's just like, how many opposites can we throw together in this hit? But Do or Die was more campy. It was definitely more giving you West Village feelings in the club, whereas Unlimited Capacity for Love, in my mind, is more polished. Her vocal tone is more steady, it's deeper, and it's also a little more androgynous sonically, whereas Do or Die was giving you visual androgyny. The fact that this song, it also kind of gives me the same feeling as a Patrick Crowley or a Giorgio Moroder. It's this foreboding, kind of dark, driving beat that you can dance to, but it's also very moody. And, you know, Grace Jones is still performing now in her, I believe, mid to late 70s with the same power. But this era of her music was something so unusual and almost a little bit haunting.
Yeah, get my song wet.
So during the same era as Grace Jones' Unlimited Capacity for Love, I'm going to take it back across the pond to another kind of dance floor in Scotland and talk about Liz Fraser of the Cocteau Twins. The Cocteau Twins had a song called Wax and Wane, and they were young punks coming out of farmland in Scotland, so you would not expect them to be doing dark wave dance music, but that's exactly what happened. Liz is known for definitely having a different vocal style. She's a big influence on me personally, but also just being innovative in her language. She created her own kind of Gaelic gibberish and words. So no one really knows most of her lyrics until the later albums, I would say maybe the last 2 or 3. And that alone made her a standout artist. And then her range was also a little unusual. So she created her own language. She has a range that's not mainstream. And also her presentation wasn't mainstream. And specifically on this Cocteau Twins song, Wax and Wane, what drew me to that style is their use of drum machine and tape loops. For this song, if you look up the video, which I'll be sharing, it's only her and Robin Guthrie, the guitarist, on stage. So it's two people creating such a huge sound. And then floating on top of that sound are Liz's ethereal and unusual vocals.
Yeah, get my song wet.
So in other boroughs, as well as the Midwest and down south, the Pointer Sisters I wanted to talk about because they reinvented themselves in the early 80s. They kind of shed behind their Depression era imagery and gospel sounds and went for a slicker Caribbean influenced vocal style on their song Automatic. This song really stands out for me again because they were known for more upbeat and kind of poppy R&B tunes such as Yes We Can. And in this song, they really played up the fact that they all possessed lower vocal ranges and did 3-layered harmonies with that, sounding extremely androgynous and just really smooth. In a strange way, this song reminds me a little bit of Billy Ocean production-wise. But they also reinvented themselves visually with softer kind of muted tones. And, you know, at a glance, if you didn't know the Pointer Sisters, you would think that they were part of the Tom Tom Club. So they really flipped their whole presentation. But the thing that, again, that stands out for me is what they did with their vocals and just kicking it down like several drops key-wise, giving you a really different kind of smoother feeling and tone and mood. But it's also still a very upbeat song.
Yeah, get my song wet.
Your crew is protected by rules. With fabricated legalese, oh please, no pride or charm.
I talked about Debbie Deb earlier, but I really also want to mention Shannon. The reason that Shannon stands out, and it might be hard to visualize this living in a place like New York, but Let the Music Play was a huge, huge hit across the nation. I don't think that that song was not just a dance hit, it was also a breakdance hit. And in my mind, and I could be wrong, it's one of the first records I remember hearing a DJ cut and scratch as part of the mix of the record that was not a remix. The flip side of the record, which was like an instrumental remix, had both, but to have a mainstream single with those club elements in it was really new and really groundbreaking. And then to add to the level of street cred, Shannon also performed the song live on the now infamous TV show produced by Michael Holman of Grey called Graffiti Rock.
Yeah, get my song wet.
So during the same time, I want to mention another dance hit singer from across the pond who was based in New York City. Her name is Cheyenne. Her big hit song was Call Me Mr. Telephone. Visually, she was giving you the same spirit hood as Annabella from Bow Wow Wow. Very new wave, very punk, very deconstruct. And her video predates Girls Just Want to Have Fun, showing her and her homegirls' camaraderie. But the thing about the song that stands out is the danceability, and also she's doing a bit of rapping on the song, which again, even though it's mid-80s now, it's still a bit unusual. So I wanted to mention her song as well, because she's something in between the punk and the freestyle as far as the mood and the kind of mixes that you would hear her in, as well as the clubs.
Yeah, get my song wet.
The Scroggin Sisters from the South Bronx, also known as ESG, standing for Emerald, Sapphire, and Gold. ESG were very unusual vocally as well as musically because they were a dance band, and they not only stayed in rotation in downtown and club playlists, they also toured with The Clash. I wanted to mention ESG because they are a band who are still operating today, and they also now have incorporated their daughters into the music. So something happens when relatives are in bands together as far as vocal dynamics go. You can hear this in bands from the Everly Brothers to the Breeders, Kim and Kelly Deal, and you really hear it with ESG. There is something about the family bond and the genetic vocal abilities that happen. and then throw in the fact that, again, their vocal range and style is not so mainstream. Again, they don't have the biggest ranges. They don't necessarily sing in genres that are ascribed to dance music, but the spirit is there.
Yeah, get my song wet.
I chose to speak about Alison Moyet because her background is also a little bit unusual. She came from the punk scene, but she was, much like Joe Strummer of The Clash, originally a classic R&B and soul singer. She met up with Vince Clarke of Depeche Mode, and they formed Yazoo together, and their hit song that most people are familiar with is Situation. Situation is a dance classic akin to the Blue Monday of New Order. Every DJ that is known to man has this record, and it also just crosses all genres from new wave to electro to R&B. Her voice is very deep and husky and smoky, and she also has a bit of a gospel feeling to it, despite being a white English woman from London.
Yeah, get my song wet.
So around the same time, even though Yazoo's song Situation did launch in 1982, it was still in the charts and in rotation well into the mid 80s, 85, 86 era. Another film came out by Jonathan Demme called Wild Thing, and this movie stood out for me for a number of reasons, from the new wave graphics to just the whimsical soundtrack. But the outro soundtrack is something to take note of. It features a cameo by well-known reggae artist Sister Carol. In the film, she's singing the theme to the movie, but she's also taken lyrics from the 1960s classic mod song and flipped it into a Casio reggae song. And what she does with her voice in this song, I find very interesting. She adds almost schoolgirl squeaks and theatrics. It's whimsical, it's comical, and it also still feels a little bit like new wave, even though it's a reggae song. So I feel like Sister Carol took some chances with her rendition of this song, and it's a real sweet surprise at the end of the film. So I wanted to include her in the story.
Yeah, get my song wet.
On the other side of things, sonically, this brings us to the Bronx, and one of the first kind of after-hour parties I ever attended. I can't tell you what the name of the club was, but a song I will never forget from this era on Sleeping Bag Records is by the artist Joyce Sims. The song is called All in All, and this song kind of came on the heels of Freestyle, but it also had the mood of, I can't say it had the mood of Yazoo, but it still had that Casio kind of heaviness to it. And her vocals were very haunting and very pleading. And that's kind of also a reoccurring theme with a lot of freestyle music. This song was a big hit in gay clubs, it was a big hit in R&B clubs, and it was a huge radio, like, Friday night remix hit. And she had some other hits as well. I believe Joyce Sims is actually a UK artist, but she was huge in New York City. She had the same kind of vocal timbre as a Evelyn Champagne King, or even the same mood as some of the vocal harmonies I mentioned, talking about the new wave era of the Pointer Sisters. So I wanted to include her in this story.
Yeah, get my song wet.
At the same time, crosstown or more downtown, at the Peppermint Lounge, one would have rolled in and seen a very young punk transplant from Atlanta named RuPaul. RuPaul made a independent underground blaxploitation film called I Am Star Booty. When I saw RuPaul performing this song, he had a white mohawk down his back, was carrying a plastic machine gun and singing, I am Star Booty and I am fierce. I didn't understand what I was witnessing at the time, but I wanted to see more of it. RuPaul, although he does go by he, has a beautiful singing voice. Later, during the rave and kind of revival electronic era of the late 90s, he would have a huge hit with his song You Better Work, CoverGirl. And this was kind of at the peak of supermodel era. But before that, when he was just a young transplant in New York City, he was Star Booty.
Yeah, get my song wet.
Okay, so now we're up to the year 1987, and freestyle is still going strong. At Club 18, there was a band performing called Company B, and their breakout hit was Fascination. I want to talk about Company B specifically regarding their lead singer, Kathy Dennis. Kathy Dennis had an unusual voice. In my opinion, pitched a little bit high and a little bit uncomfortable, but again, it gave you that feeling of young girl groups, and the sing-along-ship and the relatability kind of helped her gain a lot of popularity. But she also, as a breakout artist, had hit songs on some Fox television shows, such as Beverly Hills 90210 and Melrose Place, which was kind of like a soap opera. But Company B, they were another prevalent sound in their music. They took the Casio keyboard tones more toward a horn section. So again, there was like an underlying Caribbean feel to their music, even though it was very fast. A year later, a classic Yemenite descent artist, Ofra Haza, found herself on the charts as her 1978 hit song Imininalu was sampled by Eric B. and Rakim. That song became so big that she re-released the original. It was also really refreshing to hear someone sing in another language and to bring that flavor to dance music and to hip hop.
Yeah, get my song boy.
Later, in the same year, she was also sampled by a new project from members of A.R. Kane, who coined the term Dream Pop, and Colorbox, named Mars, Maarrs, and their breakout song was Pump Up the Volume, which also sampled the same song. So it's pretty exciting to see someone from 1978, which was pretty much peak disco era, have a revival and even re-release her own music, thanks to this renewed interest in her voice and her vocal style.
Yeah, get my song boy.
Most people know rave as beginning in the UK. I know it was also happening on the West Coast in Northern California, as I was based there then, and we were very much in a kinship with the Manchester scene. In Manchester, one of the biggest clubs that spawned the kind of post-punk and early electronic rave music scene was the Factory and Factory Records. And we all know that Joy Division and New Order came from that. During this time, another young group sprouted up, and this group was led by Norman Cook. Most people know him as Fatboy Slim. At the time, he had been in a breakout group called the House Martins. This group was called Beats International. What they did, and the reason I want to mention them, they took a wildly successful song by American R&B group called the SOS Band, Just Be Good to Me, and they redid it and repurposed the lyrics as Dub Be Good to Me. Instead of having a R&B black singer, they have a young Anglo woman who's she's giving you a rave feeling as the vocalist. She's very bubbly and bouncy. They have a live drummer, they have a DJ. They really just turned this into kind of an electronic dance song. And her voice is, again, in my opinion, giving you girl group feelings. She's very young. She's very sprightly. She's not trying to be an R&B singer. She's not trying to sound American. When you listen to this record, you feel like you're in the middle of the party. And that is something that maybe didn't happen so much in dance music outside of freestyle and disco, in my opinion. So that's why I wanted to mention Dub Be Good to Me from Beats International.
Yeah, get my song boy.
So while we're talking about rave music and the UK, I also want to mention another kind of one-hit group called Soho. Soho were made up of twin sisters, and they were fans of the Smiths. So what they did is sample the hit single How Soon Is Now, which was a huge club hit across the pond as well as in New York. And the name of their song is Hippie Chick. Again, their voices are extremely unusual. To me, almost a little bit gothic. And also the fact that it's twin sisters singing, you're getting that dissonant kind of family vocal tone happening that is just, it's almost a little eerie. It's a little bit of a The Shining feeling, for lack of a better description. But what they did sample wise, because I DJ this song a lot and it matches beat for beat with the original. Like, they really paid respect to the fact that the rhythm section of the Smiths is no joke, but they made it their own. So I have to give a shout out to Soho, Hippie Chick. Those sisters did their thing. And I love the fact that their voice is nothing like Morrissey. And that is not the sound you expect to hear when you hear the beginning of House and Is Now.
Yeah, my song boy.
Okay, so now we're getting into 1994, and a record of reggae artist Don Penn's from 1967 has a new breath of life pumped into it as her single No 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 appears in the downtown iconic indie film starring Parker Posey, Party Girl. I want to mention Party Girl for a few reasons. Parker Posey was someone who was very accessible. You would see her at all kinds of parties all the time, just around. But also that film really captures the essence of what it meant to be a nightlife entrepreneur at that time in the East Village, and people throwing parties in their houses and what kind of music happened at the parties. And it really was a wild mix. So do yourself a favor and get that soundtrack, but specifically get this song by Don Penn. When that movie came out, you could not walk anywhere in the East Village or Brooklyn without hearing that song cranked full volume coming out of someone's car or a boombox or a bodega. And the fact that it's a song from 1967, and much like what happened with Ofra Haza, it became such a revitalized hit after the movie came out that Don Penn actually did a new version of it and re-released it and charted with it again. Now, Don Penn's voice I also want to talk about, because she, much in the tradition of many reggae singers, the tone that she chose to sing in, or perhaps maybe even the limitation of what her scale is, her range is something that is not so easy to listen to if you are used to listening to perfect music. But it grabs you emotionally because you can hear the humanity in her voice. And it's not easy to imitate. If you're a traditional singer and you're used to singing perfect, you'll never sound like Don Penn. I've been in the studio with people who tried to ask me to, and I cannot. But that's why we love her. And the fact that she was able to get that respect and get her flowers while she's still here, and also put a new twist on it, but not change her style. She didn't try to make it perfect. She didn't try to change it. All she did is modernize perhaps the music behind her song. I think that's really important to mention, because sometimes it's easy to lose your original vision when you do have an unusual voice or your style is different. Sometimes you might feel the pressure to change, and that thing that makes your voice unusual, you should never change. So I really want to give some props and respect to Don Penn, and it was really exciting to see that she did actually re-own and reclaim that song, and it's still going. It's still a New York classic forever.
Yeah, my song boy.
At a flat that is rumored to be the former home of folk punkers, the Butthole Surfers. At that party, a young artist named Badawi happened to come with some records, and that's where I met him. And the rest is history. We released our first song, Spit At It, and eventually we put an album together. And that's how I came to be a member of the Underground Producers Alliance. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Honeychild Coleman.
Yeah, my song boy.
Choice of song styles as well as vocal tone I also find interesting. Kim Gordon's voice is, how do I describe it? I wouldn't say smoky, but I would say she has almost a smoky timbre. It's definitely androgynous. Her range is not super high, but she has a lot of passion to what she says. She puts a lot of emphasis on the stories that she's telling when she sings. So when she decided to cover Madonna's Into the Groove for Ciccone Youth, I also found that song choice interesting. And I'm just mentioning Madonna here briefly We all know that Madonna kind of broke out through the freestyle scene and through collaborating with Jelly Benitez. But Madonna was not originally a singer either. She was a performance artist and professionally trained dancer who loved club music and became a singer. So when Madonna started singing originally, she also, her voice was a bit ambiguous to the point that people didn't really know her ethnicity. They didn't visualize a white Italian woman from Michigan. I'm guessing, based on when I first heard her, more of a Latina woman from the Lower East Side. So to take this huge Madonna song that also has some symbolism in the club world, because it was featured in the film Desperately Seeking Susan, and this specific song was used in a scene filmed in Danceteria, Ciccone Youth kind of tapped into a lot of downtown elements in choosing that song to cover. I also love the fact that breaking away from traditional Sonic Youth, audio elements, Ciccone Youth definitely incorporated drum machine, Casio, strange, eerie samples, in addition to and supporting Kim's vocal style. So I had to give a shout out and a mention to Kim Gordon. She's a big influence on me as a bass player, but also just the chances that she takes creatively should be noted as a vocalist.
Yeah, get my song wet.
Moving right along, also in 1990, we're going to shift over. They were known for more upbeat and kind of poppy R&B tunes, such as Yes We Can. And in this song, they really played up the fact that they all possessed lower vocal ranges and did 3-layered harmonies with that, sounding extremely androgynous and just really smooth. In a strange way, this song reminds me a little bit of Billy Ocean production-wise, but they also reinvented themselves visually with softer, kind of muted tones. And at a glance, if you didn't know the Pointer Sisters, you would think that they were part of the Tom Tom Club. So they really flipped their whole presentation. But the thing that stands out for me is what they did with their vocals and just kicking it down like several drops key-wise, giving you a really different kind of smoother feeling and tone